Praise be to God in all things. Joining us today via Zoom chat is Mike from Restoring the Faith, former employee at an investment banker on Wall Street and a financial guru of a type of some kind. But we're very grateful he's decided to wake up today and join the program. Considering the last time we tried this. Good morning, Devil Dog.
Second time's a charm.
Leatherneck, praise be to God. You know, I brag about Marines all the time, how we can get ourselves out of bed no matter what and be where we got to be early. And then Mike doesn't show for the show.
And there's exceptions to every rule, Joe.
Well, praise be to God. I tease you. It's good to have you back on the program. Hyperinflation. It sounds good, but what does it really mean is the question. I was reading some articles just this morning about hyperinflation on the rise. Of course, we all know that the Fed tends to print cash and put it in your bank account, whether you want it or not. There's an issue there. We saw all the stimulus bills that got passed last year, but yesterday, I paid over $3 a gallon in the state of Texas, which blows my mind. We see the cost, the price index, the cost of food has increased 4.6% since last year. Everything is on the rise. I mean, literally housing, fuel, food, every aspect of life is starting to get very uncomfortable for so many people. What is going on, Mike?
Inflation is certainly at a 30-year high, according to even the metrics that the government is willing to release. The printing of money has been nonstop. I think really realistically since 2002, when the Fed, created quantitative easing, really wanted low interest rates, really wanted to allow people the so-called American dream of buying a home, and that run up from 2002 to 2007, where the bottom fell out of the housing market, the printing has not stopped since then. And inflation is really an interesting thing, Joe, because it's an insidious secret tax that we all pay. We're not even really aware of it. It's so slow. It's so incremental. But it is state policy to create inflation. It is a man-made creation. It is not a necessary component of finance or economics. It is fiat policy by the government, and there are a number of reasons why they do it.
There's also new polls out about how bad the current administration is really doing. More than 2/3 of Americans think the economy is in poor condition, and nearly half think it will get worse over the next year, according to polling results released yesterday. AP, NORC, Center for Public Affairs. 54% said economy was poor, and 45% said it was good. I'm curious, Mike, who do you think the 45% who think this economy is good are?
Well, maybe 10% of them are the millionaires and billionaires, but when you establish the fact, scriptural fact, our Lord says, "Render to Caesar what is to Caesar's, and render to God what is God's." There's no possible way that our Lord could have possibly meant that Caesar gets more than God. And at the time, when you think about your tithe is a 10% pre-tax of your gross earnings to the church. It's a precept of the church that you have to support Holy Mother Church. It's also a precept of the church that you cannot deprive a man of his wages. It's one of those sins that cries out for the justice of God. And so when Caesar takes more than his due, when he takes twice as much as God, 4 times as much as God, 10 times as much as God, you really have a problem. You have an overreach. It no longer is taxation. It's really theft. And the Catholic Church, unlike, some people say, well, the early church was, what they were almost communist. People didn't own things, but no, that's bogus. It's one of the 10 commandments implies personal property. You shall not steal. I get to own things. I get to keep what I earn. And inflation is so intricately tied to taxation, because what inflation allows policymakers to do is it allows them to borrow debt and overspend and then inflate the debt away. So I'll give you a quick example. I know we're on radio and time matters. If you buy a house for $200,000, of a mortgage at the point in time when a Hershey bar costs $1, then essentially you bought a house that costs 200,000 Hershey bars. But if inflation halves the purchasing power of your dollar, and now a Hershey bar costs $2, then suddenly your house can be purchased for 100,000 Hershey bars, not 200,000 Hershey bars, which just basically means that you have cut your debt in half. You have inflated it away. It's almost like abstracting the thing away. And that is what the federal government tries to do. They can spend like drunken sailors, and they'll just inflate the debt away over time and pretend like you and I won't notice.
You know, the numbers are so huge. They're so out of control that it's hard to wrap our minds around them. I mean, most of us are just trying to make the day work, right? We got to get to work. We got to get to school. We got to get the kids to here. We got to go to this doctor's office there. We got to pay the bills. We got to put gas in the car. We're trying to just get through life on a daily basis, let alone keep up with the shenanigans of the economy, the policies, the politics, the politicians and all the rest. I mean, these numbers, they're so massive. Trillions of dollars in these bills. How does anybody make sense of that?
Well, that's a good question, Joe. I mean, I think studies have proven that the human mind really just can't even comprehend numbers that big. They just become numbers on a page.
Hold that thought. Sorry. Mike from Restoring the Faith is our guest, former Wall Street investment banker, finance guy, guru, and we're talking about the hyperinflation, but wait, there's more. There's still our debt that China is not sure they're going to continue to buy. There's an issue there. Will that debt come due? Will we default? What happens then? Plus usury, plus everything else. Mike, welcome back to the program. Just before the break, I asked you about wrapping our head around the numbers. Can you pick up there?
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are so big that people just can't comprehend them. They just become an abstract thing. You know, it just becomes a number on a page. We realistically, every child born in the United States, which there are fewer and fewer of them, of course, but every child is born under the burden, inheriting, we talk about inheriting the American dream and becoming a U.S. citizen and your birthright. Well, part of your birthright is about $200,000 in owed taxes just to get this economy back going. I mean, that's talk about being saddled by debt. It's really a generational theft. It's a theft that has been enacted by the current generation that is stealing from future generations by our overspending, by our endless government programs and policies designed to make ourselves feel comfortable today at the expense of our children's futures. You know,
one of the things that just bugs me to no end about all of these heavy pork-infested bills that they want to pass, their stimulus or the budget or whatever, is they spend so much of our hard-earned money on stupid stuff. They waste it away. It's not even going to like the bottom line to keep the doors open, the lights on, and government functioning. It goes to this, crazy wackadoodle program and that crazy wackadoodle communist program. I mean, it just seems like we give so much away. Do they really not have a conscience, I guess is my question? Or who's behind these bills? Are there economists that write these things? Who writes this stuff?
Oh, certainly not. Certainly not. I mean, essentially what happens is each member of the committees that put these things together wants to be able to go home to his or her home district and say, I brought home the bacon. Boy, howdy, I'm going to study this obscure lizard here in our district and make sure that this lizard, survives. And that's why you sent me to Congress. It's 435 elected people who are each trying to get an outsized share of the goodies so that they can continue to purchase votes and buy their way back into power. It's really a perverse system, and there's no way to change it, really. I mean in terms of like what people's incentives are on Capitol Hill.
That kind of makes me think collegiality. The problem with it, one problem with it rather, is the fact that you become anonymous. There's so many people. It's kind of like the USCCB. When the USCCB, United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, gets together and they declare something, well, then no individual bishop needs to take credit for it. There's no one to blame, no one to say to hold accountable. And in the same case, like, who do we hold accountable for all these things? We talk about the past generations have put us in debt and are stealing from us, but who do we hold accountable? What's the path forward?
Yeah, remember when Pelosi said you have to pass Obamacare to know what's in it?
Right.
Yes.
I mean, imagine the USCCB saying, "Oh, well, we have to pass this resolution to know what's in it," or something like that. I mean, that would be awful.
Yeah, similarly related. This morning I was driving in and I heard a piece of audio from one of the voting committee members at the FDA who said we have to start vaccinating kids to test its safety. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. The reverse and insane thinking of these people.
He said the quiet part out loud. He wasn't supposed to say that part.
I know. Right? Yeah. Oh, look, it's not safe. Well, now we know. Let's talk about debt. China buys most of our debt, which you would think is probably not a great relationship to have. The country who is launching hypersonic nuclear capable missiles in our atmosphere to also own our debt. What happens if we default and they stop buying?
This is more than just a thought experiment, Joe. I mean, this is something that could realistically happen. It's publicly available information that in 2009, at the height of our financial crisis, that China and Russia, the two largest owners of our debt, got together, and one of the two, and I forget which one, it was either China or Russia, was in favor of dumping the U.S. debt, of saying this is our moment, this is our opportunity to totally bankrupt and ruin the United States. It's money as a weapon system. It is economic war. And I think it was China at the time who said, no, now is not the time. Wait until the next cycle. So I think that this is a very timely question because, business cycles, they say, are normal. Business cycles are, booms and busts in housing markets, in Wall Street, in prices of things. When you didn't have a fiat currency, when there were no business cycles. Yes, there were feasts and famines with respect to, the productivity of land, the weather, the bounty of God, of Almighty God. But there was no such thing as a business cycle in terms of, whether or not your interest rate was appropriate. So I think, what happens to us if and when, and probably more when than if, China and Russia do collude and stop buying our debt. It's a bad day for us. We've seen examples of this in world history when a currency fails. And I think the most spectacular version of this is not any of the versions that are really well known that people talk about, but think about the Habsburg Empire prior to World War I. Blessed Emperor Karl von Habsburg, considered by many to be a saint. He's on his path to sainthood, the last Holy Roman Emperor. Their currency was the reserve currency of Europe. It wasn't the pound sterling. It wasn't the German mark. It was the currency of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That was in 1917. 1 year later, that currency disappeared off the face of the earth. The disaggregation and the destruction of the Holy Roman Empire, the abdication of or the exile of the crown, and all of that happened within 1 year. I mean, that is 100 years ago. That is lightning speed. That could happen to us. We are the reserve currency of the world. The petrodollars, they transact in, but they could decide in the Middle East to not transact in U.S. dollars anymore. They could stop holding our currency. And that really is what allows us to do what we do, is the fact that everyone else accepts our currency. That's the danger of a fiat currency, is that it always fails throughout all time, in all places, all history. Eventually it fails, and ours will too. And this is why I think it's so important that Catholics can prepare themselves, financially for that. So
what does that look like exactly, preparing ourselves for that? And I really... I'm kind of a dumb guy right here. I don't really know much about, especially when it comes to economics. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. What is it? What do you mean by it's guaranteed to fail, fiat currency? What is fiat currency, and what is the path forward?
Well, we used to have a gold-based currency. We used to have a coin-based currency. Insofar as, you could take your currency to a bank and exchange it for a set amount of silver or gold. And so we knew that there was gold and silver, a hard asset that under girded our currency. That's no longer the case. We were taken off the gold standard in the 1960s. Since then, it's been absolute chaos. Since then, we've seen inflation. And now, that the fact that we are unmoored from a real tangible asset, the fact that we are just floating out there and a fiat means, that the government just speaks it into being. It's really an inversion of Our Lady's fiat. That allows them to print money on demand. They can create it on demand. And banks do this too. Banks create currencies called fractional reserve lending. They only have to keep, let's say, 8% on deposit, and then everything else they can lend. So if you put $1 into a bank, they're going to now lend out $10, which means effectively they've created $9 that never existed before. So it's all has an inflationary effect on how we live. Your question, Adrian, of what do we do about it? I think the first step is that we really start thinking about our holding real assets and trying to divest ourselves from the U.S. dollar in general. Now, everything that we do, everything that we buy, stocks and bonds and gold and land and real estate, it's all denominated in the U.S. dollar. We all think about it in terms of the U.S. dollar. But what we should be thinking about in terms of how the productivity of the underlying asset itself. Should I buy Bitcoin or not? Well, the question is it a productive asset? Will it survive a hyperinflationary environment? Will it survive, an unexpected attack on our infrastructure? If I don't have 5G, can I access my Bitcoin? So these are the questions that we need to be asking ourselves: are the preservation of capital, the survivability, and then finally, and I think, Joe, you alluded to this, the moral component of finance. And this is something that we never really think about. The usurer used to be buried apart from the Catholic. The usurer was buried with the suicides in his own graveyard that nobody visited. That was how severe usury was considered by the Catholic Church. For like 1,200 years, it started to change because of the commerce in Florence, and ultimately by the 1800s, usury was totally accepted. But is it moral? Is it licit? Am I investing in companies that commit abortions, for example? Am I expecting an unreasonable return? The Holy Father says that we don't want you reproducing like rabbits. Well, we expect our investments to reproduce like rabbits. We expect our money to make money.
Yeah. We are almost out of time. Mike from Restoring the Faith has been our guest. With a lot of trouble here on the horizon and not a lot of clear answers. You got about 60 seconds. What's your best advice?
Best advice is, first of all, buy the book Creature from Jekyll Island if you're interested in the history of money and the what is money. And more importantly than that, I think everyone should look into the Catholic land movement from about 100 years ago. This is when Catholics said, we don't want this modern economy anymore. It's not working for us. We want a truly Catholic economy where the man can work, where the mother can stay home and raise the children. I think by returning to the land, by looking into productive assets, I think that we can protect ourselves from this modern labyrinth, which is a house of cards poised to fail. All
right. Praise be to God. Mike from Restoring the Faith, thank you for your time today. Check him out on YouTube, Restoring the Faith. Praise be to Jesus. Have a great day, Mike. God love you. That is going to do it for hour number one.